Okay, in the name of God. I want to have a very brief review on the knowledge and information you get up to here. You can see two epithelial cells here. We said the epithelial cell have some characteristic features. We first start from the apical features. If you remember, we have a microvillus like this in the apical part, microvillus, and some of cells have a very long process and sometimes branch, cilia, and some epithelial cells have a very, very long and motile process called cilia. These are the features of the apical part of epithelial cells. In the lateral domains, we have intercellular junctions like a tie junction, and also the intercellular junction or cell adhesion, Zenula adhesions, another intercellular junction, and also the smosome gap junctions. These are also the lateral domain features. And also we said, I said one of the basal domain features, if you remember, I said the hemidesmosome attached the epithelial cell to the extracellular matrix. Now we are going to explain the basal domain. I mean here the basal domain features of the epithelial cell. Let's go to the slides and start with one of the features of the basal domains of epithelial cell. And this feature is the basal lamina or basement membrane. You can see epithelial cell here. In the basal part, we can see the extracellular matrix felt like a sheet under the epithelial cell. This sheet or this extracellular matrix attach the epithelial cell to the underlying connective tissue or other tissue. When we see under the light microscope, we see a very thin layer, call it the basement membrane. And when we magnify it with the electron microscope, we see something like this. Immediately under the epithelial cell, we see a very thin layer formed by a thin fibrils, call it the basal lamina. And under the basal lamina, we see a fibrous and diffuse and very thick extracellular matrix, call it the reticular lamina. These both together, basal lamina and reticular lamina, form the basement membrane. Let's see a real picture from the basement membrane. You can see here the cell membrane of epithelial cell. Immediately under this cell membrane, you see the basal lamina. And after that, you can see the reticular fiber in the reticular lamina. Another picture, I highlight the epithelial cell. You can see the epithelial cell in red here. Immediately under the epithelial cell, this part, let me show it. From the cell membrane up to here, you see the basal lamina and this part is a reticular lamina. You can see the reticular lamina is very thick and basal lamina is very thin. The component of the basal lamina produced by the epithelial cell and the component of the reticular lamina produced by the connective tissue cells like a fibroblast. Reticular lamina is something like this. It's a network or meshwork-like structures, and you can see the reticular fiber arranged in different orientations. And because of that, we call it the reticular, like a net of the spider, something like these structures. Okay. And again, you can see, let me show it by arrow. Okay. And again, you can see here a epithelial cell. I highlighted in yellow. After the cell membrane, we can see the basal lamina and also the reticular fibers. In this slide, you can see the reticular fiber sometimes like this spot or circular, and sometimes you see a black longitudinal lines. It means we have here the cross section of reticular fiber and longitudinal sections of the reticular fiber, because we have reticular fiber in different orientations and different position. Let's back to the light microscope. The epithelial cell. Immediately under the epithelial cell, we can see the basement membrane. I highlighted by a yellow line, and when I magnify more, you can see this part. This is the basement membrane. Basement membrane means you can see the basal lamina and the reticular lamina together. When we have these two lamina, I mean the basal lamina and the reticular lamina together, the thickness is enough to see by a light microscope. But without the reticular lamina, the basal lamina is very, very thin, and we cannot see it by light microscope, and we need the electron microscope. So when we see it by light microscope, it means we see the basement membrane, not the basal lamina. Also, we can stain the basement membrane by some dye can stain the carbohydrate, because we have a lot of glycoprotein and protoglycan in the basement membrane, so we can stain it with this kind of dye. One of them is a PAS, periodic acid shift. We can stain the basement membrane and see it under the light microscope. For example, this is slide from the kidney. You can see cross section from the nephrons, and you can see the basement membrane in red, something like this here, and also this part around the epithelial cell and around the nephrons. These are the epithelial cells, and under the epithelial cell we can see the basement membrane is stained by a PAS. Again, in this slide you see epithelial cell. We said under the epithelial cell we have a very thin layer called the basal lamina. The component of the basal lamina produced by the epithelial cells, and after that we have a reticular lamina, and the component of the reticular lamina is produced by a connective tissue cells. These together called the basement membrane. Let's see the component of these two parts. The component of the basal lamina are collagen type 4, laminin, entactin, and another name for entactin is nidogen, and the perlecan, or another name is the heparin sulfate. This component, I said, produced by the epithelial cell. Laminin and entactin are glycoprotein, and perlecan is a protoglycan. I will explain it in detail in the connective tissue chapters. And the reticular lamina is also produced by this component, collagen type 3 and collagen type 7. And most of them are collagen type 3. Another name for collagen type 3 is the reticular fiber. Because of that, also we call this lamina, reticular lamina. And collagen type 7 attach the reticular lamina to the basal lamina. And another name for collagen type 7 is a anchoring fiber. Anchor the collagen type 3 or reticular lamina to the basal lamina. And in the schematic picture from the basal lamina, you see the component of the basal lamina, laminin, entactin, pellican, and collagen type 4. This component assembled to form a basal lamina. You can see a felt-like structure in this picture. And also in this schematic picture, you can see one epithelial cell attached to the basement membrane by hemidesmosome, and also the basal lamina, this part, and reticular lamina. Reticular lamina formed by collagen type 3. You can see the collagen type 3 here, anchored by collagen type 7 to the basal lamina. In this picture, it's very good to see these details. Some of other cells, I mean the non-epithelial cell. For example, here the muscle cells, smooth muscle cells, and also the nerve cells, muscle cells, and also fat cells have structures like a basal lamina around the cells, and not just in the basal part. You can see the epithelial cell have a basal lamina in the basal part, but some other non-epithelial cells like a muscle cell, nerve cell, and fat cells have a structure like basal lamina, but around the cell, encircling around the cells, not just in the basal part. And these structures in these cells called the external lamina, not the basal lamina. But the component of this structure is very similar to the basal lamina, and attach this cell to the extracellular matrix. The basal lamina have some functions that are very important in our body. For example, the basal lamina or basement membranes, better to say the basement membranes, act as a semi-permeable filters to filter the material coming into the epithelial cells, especially from the below connective tissue. And also it's important to absorbing the growth factor from the connective tissue to nutrition the epithelial cell, and also the basement membrane act as a route for the epithelial cell migration. Also, it have a function to epithelial repair and regenerations, to keep the cell polarity, the polarity of epithelial cells. These are the function of the basement membrane.